and welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. Great to have on today JP Gance from Communio, and we're going to have a great conversation about the importance of marriage ministry. Now, I know the pastors out there listening are thinking, oh boy, I need another ministry, another something else to add. We want to talk about how central I think this can be. When I first heard of Communio, a great idea. And we've been talking all year long about America's 250th anniversary and how do we renew the United States? Well, let's get back to the basics. So JP, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
Joshua, thanks so much for having me. Great to be with you.
I wanted to jump in just asking you any recent kind of success story, and then we'll get to your bio and get down the road a bit, but just any recent success story. How is God using your ministry?
Oh gosh, I think of a couple out in Bozeman, Montana, a young couple who had been living together, had long-term plans perhaps to get married. And because their pastor, the lead pastor of their church, a small evangelical church out there, a lot of young adults, they got pulled in because this pastor caught the vision of championing marriage, championing relationships, and came to one of their hiking events out in Bozeman as an outreach and an engagement for folks who are non-church members as part of our coaching to churches.
It sounds like a very Western thing, by the way.
It was.
There's some great hiking ministries elsewhere, I'm sure. But
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. I'm a helplessly East Coast guy, and so I'm just not a huge fan of hiking. But that said, I know a lot of people love it, and this couple did really loved it. Came out, got connected with the church, began to form relationships, friendships, started to attend, and then the lead pastor was able to have a conversation with them, learn of their living situation, and had a Holy Spirit inspired conversation with this couple. And it ended up changing the trajectory of their life. They decided to move quickly and go through about a month of marriage preparation. And this young couple is now married today because of the ministry at this church and the church's focus on marriage and relationships. I think I could tell you some great recent stories of marriages saved or couples were heading for divorce. But I think, in this moment, gosh, so few people getting married right now that's been on my heart. How do we serve churches so that they inspire young people to seek out and be intentional about marriage? That's also a huge part of what we do and how we support the local church.
It's encouraging. You think about national stats, but it does boil down to one marriage at a time, one relationship at a time. Mm-hmm. And that's where the local church excels. We talk often on the podcast that the church is God's plan A. There is no plan B. Having preached through Acts, it took me about 2.5 years because I preach once a month on Sunday morning. And a few people in my church actually survived that experience. But it just stressed again that this is God's plan A. And you're there, boots on the ground, faces and names, changing culture one family at a time. Well, if you're not familiar with Communio and with JP, JP Gance is the founder and president of this organization, Communio, and is the co-author of the book, In Game, the Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America. We will have that linked in the show notes. He's also the author of the nationwide study on faith and relationships. Communio is a ministry originally incubated as the Culture of Freedom Initiative at the Philanthropy Roundtable, where he served as the organization's executive vice president. That initiative raised and spent $20 million over 3 years in 3 different states, seeking to identify the most effective strategies to boost marital health, family stability, and church engagement. And then how I came to know about Communio is a focus in Jacksonville, Florida. We're going to dive deep into this, where the divorce rate went down by 24% due to the engagement of a network of churches. So, of course, when I heard that, I'm always looking, and the focus on the podcast is who's doing the hard work of Christian citizenship. The gospel we know transforms lives, so where is that happening? So, of course, when I heard that, I wanted to jump in and catch the full story. Well, also, JP, he's practicing family life himself as a husband and father. He lives in Virginia with his wife and 8 children. So what led you, JP, to jump in and focus on the area of marriage? You've mentioned in your view, the most pressing issue. I agree, it's a Genesis 1 problem. We've been building on that all year long. But what led you personally into this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like a lot of people, Joshua, I came motivated on public policy. Actually, early on, I was raised in a home where my parents loved Jesus, inspired me on the life issue. So I came to Washington D.C. to try to fix politics and save babies. And over the course of the coming years, learned a lot, and God had some other plans to redirect my life from public policy. On a personal level, had a close family member whose family ended in marriage ended in an abusive way, and my wife and I had to take in her four kids, and we just saw what happens when families fail in that kind of way. And God started to use that in my life to redirect what I was interested in and focused on. And then a few years after that, I was looking at our politics and started to really recognize that so much of what we work on in the public policy world is affected by what's upstream in the culture. Now, you know, I'm an and both guy. Policy and culture are super important. There's just to use try to rack up my Scrabble points. I'm using a really big word, bilateral causality, right? It goes back and forth. Policy changes culture and culture changes politics. And I felt really strongly that I had learned a lot in the public policy world and private sector, and thought that a lot of that could be baptized, sanctified, and brought into the service of the church to affect change on outcomes around marriage health, around faith in Christ. And that inspired Communio's pilot initiative that got started, as you noted, in 3 different states. It was a big R&D initiative trying to see what we could do to affect change on family and marriage outcomes and on faith practice. And we found a lot of things I can confidently tell you that do not work at all. We made some mistakes along the way, but thanks be to God, we found some things that really worked. And in Jacksonville, we worked with 93 churches across the county and moved 58,912 people through 4-hour or longer skills ministry. We saturated the county with digital outreach, drawing folks in, had a phenomenal local partner with my friend Richard Albertson and Live the Life Ministries, and worked with about a dozen other national ministries that we engaged to get really scale through life-changing resources in the county. And to put it in perspective, before we got there, Jacksonville was ranked the sixth worst city in America for marriage by Men's Health magazine. And the Huffington Post had an article, well, before we got started, where they said these are the 10 cities where marriage goes to die. Okay, Jacksonville is one of those. And since the advent of no fault divorce in the state of Florida, Jacksonville had never had a divorce rate lower than the state average in divorce. And so after about 3 years, the divorce rate dropped 24% and went below the state average divorce rate for the first time since no fault, and became the lowest large county, as measured as 300,000 people or more in the state, lowest divorce rate of all large counties in Florida in that span. So huge movement. But we also saw it was good for churches, and not all of them, but a number of churches baselined their attendance, and those that did saw a 23% increase in their Sunday attendance. So we realized that coming in and helping to disciple marriages was good in and of itself. It produced better life outcomes, but it was also good for the gospel that more people came to experience faith in Jesus Christ. And so after our pilot initiative, we had to decide how to scale it, how to grow. We thought early on we would scale through the city. We would go city by city. But after some fits and starts as we were doing that in 2019 and 2020, we realized that it was the local church that was the real unit of scale. And so we redesigned everything that we do as a nonprofit ministry to serve and support the local church to share the gospel of Jesus Christ through the renewal of healthy relationships, marriage, and the family.
So encouraging, and why I saw such synergy. We consider ourselves to be part of a church-led, state-based strategy for renewing the United States, and we see some bilateral causality there too, in between the states and the federal government. And by the way, if you've been listening, folks, you get nothing else. You can sound really smart tonight when you drop that term. And so so many uses there. But We see that as well. And I was so encouraged when you start seeing those stats. It means something important has happened. There are a lot of different groups doing a lot of great things, but when you see that kind of result, it's truly amazing. I do want to dig into that a little bit further here in a second. But something else I appreciate about Communio is you're also, it's not that you don't lead through the power of the Holy Spirit and through the gospel first, but you're also
Yeah.
evidence driven, data driven. And this episode builds on a number of conversations this year with Katie Faust, with Delano Squires from Heritage, especially as he focuses on the black community. But those principles are certainly created order principles.
Yes.
With Ken Ham talking about Genesis 1, creation order stuff. But as you've studied marriage, I think many of us have a general sense of how bad things are. But could you make us feel perhaps even worse about no?
Yeah.
But we need to be hopeful realists, right? So, kind of, where are we in
Yeah.
the state of marriage?
Look, too few people are getting married. Okay. This is probably our biggest threat. Okay. We're looking at a demographic collapse, right? We have about 65% less people married getting married annually than in the year 1970. Okay. There's 31% less people getting married today than the year 2000. So it is driving all sorts of bad outcomes. One of which is the collapse of TFR. That's total fertility rate. For those who are concerned about it, uh, about 75% of the collapse in fertility can be explained by the collapse in marriage itself. Right, single people still have babies. There's babies out of wedlock, but 75% of it of the decline there is wrapped up in marriage. Right, and married people have an above replacement fertility. There's just a lot less of them getting married, and so that's driving. To put that in perspective, if we stay at our current fertility for 50 years, we will have 40% less people in the country if there's no migration, right? So there's a huge factor there. You look at everything from the decline of marriage affects things like educational outcomes, less people growing up in a married home, right? There's too many non-marital households where kids are reaching their 18th birthday outside of a married home, right? They're either divorced or have never married home. Okay, that drives mental health problems. There's kids who grow up in a non-marital home are more likely to suffer from suicidal ideation, behavioral problems, worse outcomes in school. There's higher levels of incarceration, right? My friend Aaron Bear likes to say that the decline in marriage leads to three big increases, right? You got a lot more medication spending, education spending, and incarceration spending, right? So all of those things are directly tied to the decline of marriage. And then last is, I'd say, happiness, right? Marriage is the best predictor of happiness in our society, right? Or if you're interested in your kids flourishing, you're interested in more of your fellow Americans being happy, then you should care a lot more about marriage. In fact, I was just seeing new data out last week that showed that married people with low incomes are that go to church are happier than those wealthy people who don't go to church, right? So there's just big relationships between all of these factors and marriage.
Well, I'd love to see that data at some point. That's fascinating to me. I wanted to double click on something you mentioned, because certainly at state policy level, federal policy level, lawmakers are looking at this. In fact, as we have held about 6,000 or 5 to 6,000 different connections among pastors, governing officials over the last few years, we asked a very similar question. What is the worst problem in your district? And we asked this to people that have an R and a D behind their name from rural, urban Indiana, and the response, it's uncanny how often, maybe not all the time, but something like 85, 90% anecdotally, the response to that is the breakdown of the family.
Yeah.
And trying to advocate for the family can be difficult. There was a bill this year talking about we're going to teach the success sequence. I imagine many listeners are familiar. Finish high school, get married, have children. If you do that, you're going to end up probably in the middle class. and the claims of bigotry, for stating that. But the indicator that you mentioned. So if individuals are not married, the fertility rate is down by, was that 75% with
Yes, so
couples?
75% of the declining fertility rate over the last uh, about 20 years can be explained by the decline of marriage. Okay, so whether it's Elon Musk and others have, on the secular side have started raising alarm bells that we're not creating enough workers, right? Well, well, new humans generally come from couples, and couples who get married have a lot more kids than couples who don't, right? So it's a from that perspective, it's simple. But of course, nobody is going to have kids because they want to, or maybe not nobody. Very few people will decide to go, I got to have kids because there's not enough workers in the future, right? You're not motivated. Ultimately, an orientation to new life is fundamentally a religious orientation. It's a hope for the future. It is driven by love, right? People want to be open to life and to choose life in their own family uh, out of a love for the other, right? And Catherine Picolic, her book, Catherine Picolic is a Harvard trained economist who wrote a very fascinating qualitative research book on 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 fertility called Hannah's Children. I'd encourage any of your readers to listen or to read it. It's phenomenal. But her big conclusion is the biggest driver of fertility and openness to life is actually faith, religious faith, and here's an area where the church can really, I think, the only path forward for saving um, Western civilization, saving is through marriage, and that really is through Christian marriage, right? Christian marriage fundamentally built Western civilization. Interestingly, scholars now recognize this. It was the West. You have the collapse of the fall of Rome in the fifth century, and shift quickly to the trustee family, clan family dynamics. Uh, Churchmen like Basil the Great, Gregory the Great, that champion Christian marriage. It starts to reconstitute itself. The idea of a domestic family, the idea of a father and a man leaving his mother and father and cleaving to his wife, and the two becoming one flesh becomes the norm again by the turn of the millennia, 11th, 12th century. And then you have the technological explosion of the late medieval period and the creation of the modern West. Even secular scholars say, yeah, that was the idea of entering free markets start to flow because people are engaging in commerce, not through clan systems, but through the commerce of a small town because you've got all these separate and unique families, these domestic families, these nuclear families.
Well, we could maybe camp here for the whole podcast and
Sure.
just kind of nerd out on this. I'm interested, maybe, even the effect on the concept of private property. You have these independent units instead of a clan, but then also we all find ourselves, I think, as marriage apologists in our culture. Well, why sign the paper? Why put a ring on it? Why risk that? But it fascinates me that it appears from the data like humans intuitively know if there is no long-term commitment there, then
Yeah.
why bring another life? Why bring a life into this world? And so I think sometimes we're a little reticent as Christians to just say, hey, the Bible had the answer a long time ago, and it's not something new, it's something old but forgotten, discarded. So
Yeah.
I was just encouraged by that stat, and I'm going to have to buy that book and think more deeply about this. So we didn't know Basil the Great would be in the cards today, but
Yeah.
here
We're,
we
we're,
go.
we're,
Well,
we're
you
racking up.
shared
We're racking
already.
up
Go
the
ahead.
trivia. Yeah, we're racking up the trivia numbers here.
That's right. Scrabble is going to be a win for folks after this one. But you mentioned Jacksonville already and kind of that pilot project. Would you dive a little bit more, though, into the specifics of what was actually done? So we know
Yeah.
you picked the city. It's one of the hardest hit. And that's intriguing that particular location was that way. But dig into some more of the specifics there that led to that remarkable stat.
Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, we recognize that life change, we went in with the assumption that life changes best through personal relationship. And we thought that the local church was the best scaler of one-to-one personal relationships. We also knew there was an academic field called marriage and relationship education, right? Augustine says all truth is God's truth. And so there's some really good stuff that's out there that great Christian authors have created that has some really good evidence behind it. And so we worked to scale the amount of people that would go through life-changing content through the local church. And it was a large ecumenical initiative, worked with a lot of Southern Baptist churches, some great non-denominational churches, some at the time, the Global Methodist didn't yet exist, but there were some great Methodist churches that we worked with, some Catholic parishes. And the net, anytime we worked with a church, a great partner, Live the Life Ministries, would run a program in the church like Adventures in Marriage. We would reach out, doing digital outreach in the county, inviting folks into the local church to engage in the ministry. And the net was we were able to scale that. We went before we got started, Josh. We had 300. We measured only 300 people had consumed relationship skills programming across the county in Duval County in 2015. And in 3 years, we moved that to 58,912, right? And we made it fun. There was a lot of really fun activities like fun date nights, comedy date nights. And a big thing for your listeners, we made the local church was the hero. Ultimately, we work behind the scenes so that the church would be the ultimately the point of the spear to affect life change, right? So it was ultimately a huge move in a short period of time, and we had some business guys that were dubious of the accomplishment and paid to do an independent evaluation of the work. And they hired a guy named Brad Wilcox to do an independent evaluation and found that there was no other explanation for the decline in divorce in that county other than our intervention. And so those findings were presented at the American Enterprise Institute at the end of the initiative. And since then, we've been working to scale through the local church to make it normative. The fact is, as you noted, Josh, 85% of all churches are spending nothing in this area of marriage ministry right now. And there's some good work that's done through volunteer engagement, but even when you include that, 72% of all churches in the country don't really have a substantive marriage ministry, right? And when you look at the collapse of people getting married, gosh, 91% of churches on our survey with the Barna Group said that they had no ministry whatsoever to engage single Christians, right? And so we think this is so much opportunity for the local church to lead because there's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of trauma, a lot of alienation from our families of origin that occurs, and the church can speak with a prophetic voice here and help people grow.
So encouraging. And again, the big idea for me is I was learning about Community O is just to go to any church's website and you roll down the menu there, and we reach out to a lot of churches. So I've looked at probably way too many church websites, but you have, of course, the kids ministry, teen ministry, young adults, men's, women's, senior saints, foster care sometimes, but marriage, which I think we all would probably agree or can grasp that underlies all of those, and there's no dedication. And maybe some would say, well, isn't the church as a whole focused on that? But dedicated ministry to couples, encouraging marriage, strengthening marriage, that's what you're doing. And to me, it's such a glaring, wow, I had never really thought of that before, that it's missing there.
Well, let's drill in on that a little bit, Josh, because sometimes people think about that. They hear this and they think, that's good, but I'm going to help people first receive the gospel, which will affect spiritual growth, which will affect change in the marriage. And that's true. It will, right? Obviously, having a conversion will have a great impact on the health of your relationship. But what we've seen through the research is that it's the collapse of marriage itself, which is the key driver of the growth in religious non-affiliation. That actually, the collapse of marriage preceded, by about 25 years, the rise of religious non-affiliation. Okay, you have a decoupling of sex from marriage in the 60s, and then that decouples marriage from parenting and parenting from partnering. And it's the fruit of the sexual revolution that starts to show up in the religious non-affiliation data. We see this in so many different ways in our own survey data. Okay, we've now surveyed about 200,000 people sitting in church on Sunday, and 80% of everybody in church grew up in an intact married home. This trend holds across generations. So if I'm a single man born in the year 2000, I'm sitting in church on Sunday next to a married man born in 1965. Okay, 81% of both groups of men who are sitting in church grew up in an intact married family. So if we want to know why there's not as many men in church on Sunday born in the year 2000, it's because so many fewer of them grew up in a married family than those who were born in 1965, right? And so what we're seeing is in the data is that that the collapse of the covenantal sign of salvation, right? The collapse of Christian marriage, right, is the main driver of the loss of faith, right? We got a new study coming out very soon with the Institute for Family Studies, and it reinforces this fact that the family is the single biggest predictor in the health of it, of whether or not a child grows up to accept faith in Jesus Christ. And so, as you think about ministry in the local church, I think it is normative in our history: men's ministry, women's ministry, children's ministry. We're just missing the key piece, right? The original small group is the married home, right? And coming alongside the married home to live marriage well is going to produce a lot of good fruit for the church.
Well, and there may be a few youth pastors out here that might amen this, but I always
Yes.
reflected on this as a student ministry leader. I get them for maybe an hour or two a
Yeah.
week, and Scripture very clearly puts on the family, and specifically looking in the Old Testament, even the New, on the father to be discipling those children and to lead spiritually. And then there is, I think, something to in a culture where there can be cultural forces that make the gospel hard to believe, like the basic, rational reasonableness of the gospel of Scripture can be called into question by personal experience. And so, God is my father. Well, what if you never had a good, father influence? I have a great friend named Sean Tice who does fatherless ministry. So it's surprising to hear that stat, 80%. I think that was worth the price of admission, folks, on that. But it is so formative and so important to focus on. So it's been encouraging to see your ministry growing around the country. I did want to at least note you just had a recent event at the National Archives. Maybe share just a little bit about that event and kind of as you're looking forward, what are some near-term goals?
Yeah, look, it's 250th year of our country it's a big deal. It's a huge moment, but it's a moment of both celebration and I think also reflection on how we became who we were, right? And so we held this event in our country, both with church leaders from around the country and business leaders and supporters to do that, to reflect back. And what made us who we were was our unique commitment. Tocqueville writes about this in Democracy in America, and other European historians looking at the health of the American Republic saw something special in our marriages, our unique commitment to sound morals and Christian faith. And it was that which gave birth to the largest self-governing republic in our nation's history, right? It's why those documents in the National Archives are framed like they are because of the fundamental underlying cultural health of early American life, right? So if we want to see our kids celebrate the 300th and grandkids and their posterity, our posterity, celebrate a 350th, right? I think we have to recognize it also requires us to restore the preconditions for freedom, right? Which is the self-governing home, right? The home where human capital is formed. You learn right from wrong, sound virtue. All of that comes in healthy marriages, right? It's the best formator of human capital, and so we think there's this huge opportunity. There's 100,000 churches in the country of 100 or more people. There's 25,000 really that have more than 500 or more weekly attendees, right? We believe that the church can be mobilized to help people live marriage well, to prioritize it, help our young people prioritize it. Because fundamentally, one generation of Christian marriage well lived will transform this country.
I was reflecting on a plaque in our state house. I was there at the National Archives recently, an incredible space. But back at our state house, I was leading prayer for families at our National Day of Prayer. And God kind of led me to include this plaque in the prayer. And so it sits in a rotunda, and it just reflects it as the first religious service held in the location. And it cracks me up because it is a family. You can clearly see on the plaque that it's a husband, a wife, and then the kids all going into a log cabin church. And like this is the genesis of our state. And then it is interesting to note that both the husband and the teenage son are carrying rifles like into the log cabin. So the rural pastors in Indiana are like, see, we've been doing that since the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's always an interesting part of conversation.
Yeah, look, Indiana, civilization in Indiana was created by settlers, and our nation was formed by pilgrims and settlers. No government created civilization out here, and government sprang from the civilization that pilgrims and settlers created. And I think it's important as we think about. Sometimes we're used to when we see a problem. I think we maybe too quickly think about how we can solve it politically. Politics is important, but there's a lot that we can do right now to affect change, and one of those is by going home and loving our families and helping our kids prioritize marriage well, and then in our churches, right, we can scale that life-changing work through churches across the country.
Absolutely. And it was just an encouragement for me to call everyone back. Like, this is the legacy that we've had, and we want to continue as we move forward. And so I wanted to drill down a little bit of what it looks like. On this podcast, we do try to get the brass tacks. All right. This is all great. I'm sure a lot of people, hey, we want to strengthen marriage. How exactly do we do that in 2026? So how does Communio come in and assist the work of a local church?
Yeah, we've got a model, right? So taking a quick step back, we say it's a John the Baptist approach. We want to decrease, and we want the local church to increase. So we stand behind the pulpit, supporting the leadership team to do relationship and marriage ministry well, right? And so our logo is not showing up in the local church. We're coming and supporting the church. How that looks is we have an approach we call the data-informed full circle relationship ministry. By data-informed, we're going to help the leadership team understand and analyze what's happening in the church, both with singles and marrieds and in the surrounding community. Okay. And then using smart data to invite people in. So this is a front porch ministry, helping draw people into the local church. Full circle is the idea that it's a full church. Okay. This is youth, young adult, singles, all the messiness of modern single life. Okay. The dating, the seriously dating, the engaged, the married, everybody in marriage, from the newlyweds to your gray hairs, those thriving and those struggling, right? We want to make it normal in the local church that everybody learns the skills to live out Christian relationships in a healthy way, marriage in a healthy way, right? It's animated by what we call the ministry engagement ladder. It's a 4-step process that we help a church design, build out, and implement, right? And that's invitation into outreach, into ongoing engagement, and into the growth journey. The idea is to make it normal and fun, right? When you hear marriage ministry or you hear relationship ministry, folks, when they hear that, they oftentimes may want to run in the opposite direction. That doesn't sound like something fun to a lot of people, right? So we help a church make it normal, right? Think through that from how you approach it, right? In the church right now, Josh, 1/5 of everybody sitting in church on any given Sunday are struggling right then in their marriages. We know that from our survey research, but that's not equally distributed. Okay. Women are about 62% more likely to be struggling in their marriage right now than their husbands. Okay. And the peak.
Sorry, that's kind of a funny stat. Like, she's struggling, he's just clueless. Like, that's,
yeah,
I know it's not writ large, but it is kind of an interesting stat. That's what's going on.
Right. And you look at the peak gap between men and women in church. Okay. Women in their 30s who are married are the biggest gap with how they rate their marriage with their husbands. Okay, that's 100 women in their 30s are 109% more likely to say that they're
I love
struggling.
how you have data on this. This is great.
Right.
So please keep going.
It's a huge. You know, jokingly we say like it doesn't surprise any of the wives there, but the husbands there are a little bit surprised. But I say that in the note that in their 40s, both groups become less happy. So the gap closes, but marriage health gets a bit worse in their 40s. Right? We share that data, which with Pastor understand. There's a large minority. Some good news, right, is that in all decile groups, a large majority of Christians are doing great in their marriages, but a large minority are struggling, particularly in their 30s and 40s in their marriage. Right, and if you think about singles for a moment, okay, the loneliest people in church on Sunday are not the elderly. Okay, the loneliest group of folks in your church on Sunday are unmarried churchgoers in their 30s. Okay, they're the loneliest group, and they're lonelier than the loneliest group on average of widows. Okay, in our survey research, the loneliest group of widows are widowers in their 50s. Okay, but never married and unmarried people in their 30s are lonelier on average than the loneliest group of widows and widowers. So on both cases, there's a lot of need. There's a lot of opportunity for the local church to have relevant ministry here. Okay, and there's a huge opportunity to make it so that create the expectation. Okay, I think about I was working with the NAS Church in the Columbus, Ohio area as a result of our partnership with the Center for Christian Virtue. Dale Benson has become a great friend, a phenomenal church out there, and they're leaning really into our coaching, where the whole idea is that it's just a normal thing. This is a church where just everybody works on their relationships. After church on Sunday, if you're having a donut and you hear from somebody when you're chatting over a donut and coffee, and he says, "Hey, I went with my wife to a marriage class last weekend." Okay, I always ask somebody, if you hear that, what's your first impression? What do you think about that person's marriage? Right? A lot of times, if people are honest, they say, "Well, they were probably struggling." Right? If that's your answer, then that's the enemy, so to speak. That's the enemy you have to defeat. There's stigma associated with growing in relationship health, right? And no Christian would ever, if I asked Josh to go to a spiritual retreat, Josh would never say, "Oh no, I'm already as holy as I possibly can be. No, I'm good." You may not be able to go to the retreat, but you might be grateful for the invitation. And we recognize that on this side of eternity, we're all a work in progress. We can all grow in holiness. Well, in our marriage is part of our walk. It's part of our journey to heaven. And so we're always able to grow. If we've got a good marriage, it can get great. If we've got a great marriage, it can get better. Okay. And so what we do is the idea when we coach a church is help them do creative ways to destigmatize relationship ministry for singles and marrieds, make it normal and fun that they engage in it in small doses and higher intensity experiences like an 8 to 12 hour class, whether that's one to many, one to some, or one to one. You want to make it absolutely normal that everybody at every stage of life is growing in the human skills and the spiritual skills of having a great relationship.
Yeah, I love this. I think of the struggle against pornography, and how for years it's like you can't mention it out loud, and then everyone struggling in silence but not getting victory because you can't say it.
Yeah.
And we're just facing something new in that front. But I think even the unique pressures on family today, hyper connected, raising kids in the tech revolution, and then we're like, oh no, we'll be fine. And like you said, if you went to the men's retreat, hey, you get kind of political perception or spiritual perception points for that. But if you went to the marriage retreat, like, oh, what's wrong with you guys? So yeah, that's intriguing. I hadn't really thought about that perception and how you break it down. So we'll certainly link to the website, church leaders that might be interested in it, jumping into this. And again, for any church leaders, like, oh, I have to have another program. Well, no, Camino can come in, and they've done the hard work of putting these things together, making it plug and play. So this is something you're interested in. They've got great resources. I wanted to
And in a
turn
lot of
to,
ways,
go ahead, please.
Josh, when we coach a church, we're going to really look at what the church is already doing because every church is doing a lot of things right, a lot of things well. And so what we want to do is come alongside the church, see what you're already doing, see what's working, and infuse relationship ministry into existing parts of what you're already doing. A lot of times, it's not a full spin up of something entirely new. It's helping do what you're already doing, but doing infuse it in the right way, so that if you've got small groups, then there's a great way to affect distribution here through your small groups, as a for instance, right? So there's some neat ways that churches can, through lower calorie activities, get a lot of mileage.
That's encouraging. Well, as we kind of turn to a bit of a speed round, so appreciate your time today. I wanted to ask about individuals. So those listening, maybe they're thinking today, maybe I'm in a great marriage. Some may be really struggling. And so do you have any encouragement for those listening, maybe starting in their own home? How do they support the importance of marriage, passing that on to their kids? Just as you're working in this space, any thoughts for them?
Yeah, look, as a couple, if you're married, a great habit to do is find 10 minutes every day. Okay, 10 minutes every day. Or, if starting off every day is hard, do the best you can to get 3, 4 times a week, where you put away your phone, get away from the TV, away from the computer, look face to face, okay, and have a conversation that's not about to-dos and budget hassles, okay, but a conversation on the relationship, and begin with an appreciation, a reflection, okay. We know in the Christian walk, being grateful to God for our things is a huge part of spiritual growth. It's also a big part of growth in your relationship, and think about, during that 10-minute conversation, start with one thing that you're grateful to in your spouse over the last day, over the last week, that he or she has done for you, right? Share what's new, in your life, what God's done in your life with each other, and close with a prayer, okay? And just pray together. That simple 10 minutes, that'd be one thing I'd say to do to any couple.
That's encouraging. So I wanted to zoom back out a bit. You've written the book Endgame, where I think you kind of dreamed about what could happen, subtitled The Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America. We'll link that in the show notes. But any thoughts on kind of the dream of what if this works at 100,000 churches, and where could we go? Kind of give you a chance to kind of share the vision of the book and
Yes,
ministry.
yeah. Look, we believe like I said, I believe one generation of Christian marriage, well lived, will change the world, and we believe that the church is the institution to bring that about. Right? The church built Western civilization. The church is going to save Western civilization, and there's a huge boulder. That's the culture. If you're trying to move a huge boulder as big as our culture on marriage, you need a really strong fulcrum. We believe that the church is the fulcrum, right? And we believe effective relationship and marriage ministry is the long lever that can move the boulder. And when you get enough churches moving in that direction, to help people live relationships well, right? God hardwired us for marriage. God hardwired us for relationship. We long for and seek the other and the deep life fulfillment and happiness that comes from a life of sacrificial love for somebody else. And so the world has been selling something else for a while, and it's leaving people wanting, right? There's loneliness, suicidal ideation, okay, shrinking lifespans. Everything is pointing back to prove the gospel message on marriage and relationships. So the big vision is to see the full scale mobilization of the church to live, to help people live marriage and relationship well. We think doing that well over the course of a generation will transform the world, transform the nation, and bring about a sustained revival of faith in Jesus Christ.
Amen. Well, I wanted to kind of end with that because we have a lot of kind of pie in the sky, rose-colored glass type visions, but you're actually doing the hard work, church by church, relationship by relationship. I'm so grateful for Communio and was happy to have you on. As we kind of wind down today, last question: if you had a billboard on which to put a message to the church. Sometimes people ask me, can I have 3 or 4? Like, no, like it needs to be on a phone. But a message to the broader church, my guess is it might be along these lines, but there's the billboard question for you.
Now, reviving Christian marriage is an evangelical necessity. That's what I would say. I think fundamentally, it's with that one sentence, right? It is the call to the church to evangelize through this felt need of healthy relationships, marriage, and the family.
Well, again, thank you for joining us. Again, it's the ministry is Communio, and certainly you can find that online. We'll link to it in the show notes. Also, JP is a great follow on X if you're over there as well to see some of these updates roll out in real time. But thank you again for being with us today. Thank you for all the work that you're doing to restore America through the family.
Hey, thanks so much, Josh, for having me. It was a lot of fun to be here with you.